Hello, and welcome to another episode of Ask Adam. In this episode, I think I want to share with you a little bit the questions, I guess, that I get asked. Um, Many people are puzzled by how I look at things and the perspective I have, not only on life, but business and the way things are done. And I think a lot of that has to do with understanding that you have to have a plan, you have to have a direction, and you have to know where you want to go and set that course for that direction. This being said, I guess a lot of it would be the years of growing up on the water, living in South Florida. I learned at an early age that there's a certain ebb and flow of life that should always be embraced. The water moves around in a tidal effect, both inland and ocean, exchanging waters continuously. So I think understanding the ebb and flow of life that way, I certainly learned how to embrace it. That being said, I also learned that you have to have a plan and you have to have provisions, and you have to not only know where you're going, but know what to do in the event of, I wouldn't necessarily say an emergency, but in any adverse conditions. Certainly need to know how to be calm and know how to react. That being said, I think I will embrace this episode with the story of my life. I was 20 years old and took apart the professional occupation of being first mate engineer aboard a private yacht. This yacht was going to basically circumnavigate the East Coast, the U.S. Then we were going to go through circumnavigating the Great Lakes and then travel through the river system south into the Gulf of Mexico and back to Florida, where we began this journey. So I think sharing this story, as well as some graphics to share the metaphors of life, I think would be most helpful. Kind of help see a little bit of how I see things and how I've learned to embrace life, as well as to expand. The Ask Adam platform is always seek knowledge, is one of my favorite acronyms for ask, and that I'm involved in, that I like to do it as a live show. I think it's good that we interact and that we're asking each other the tough questions about life and how to embrace life and how to understand life, as well as how to understand ourselves. And once we understand ourselves and how we react and behave to things, and as well how we can adapt and change how we react and understand things, can certainly have a profound effect on not only our life, but how we share our life with others. Kind of creates that ripple effect. Again, sorry for the water metaphor, but it's true. You put a wave in the ocean, creates that ripple, and that ripple creates the next motion and the next effect and the next effect, and eventually becomes water crashing on shore. Does not mean it stops. It means there's another wave behind it, and another wave, and another wave. This is even the effects of the lakes as well. Had some of the most tremendous amount of weather and waves, especially Lake Superior. So several books that I read regarding what they coined the gales of November, even an enclosed water that not necessarily affected by tide, although it certainly is, just because of its vast amount of water. The amount of water that would get moved and built up, we're talking waves 30-foot high in this particular lake, that would wreck and capsize freight ships. It's pretty substantial. So certainly not something to be taken light, but to have the respect of the weather and the environment around you, as well as how to handle those adverse conditions when they do arise. So again, I think that had a lot to do with how I look at life and how I embrace life, see life, and adjust in life myself. So I guess I should begin now with the quick little story that I was going to share, and that was aboard the motor vessel Joie de Vie. This is French for joy of life. And it was upon this vessel that we began at sunup in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. It was about May this time of year. We were full of fuel, food, and provisions, spare parts, and whatnot. And we were going to embark on this almost half a year long journey. Like I said, traveling up the East Coast, up to Maine, coming back down to New York, circumventing New York State and the canal waters to access the Great Lakes region and circumvent all of the Great Lakes, going to the southernmost part of Lake Michigan in Chicago, and then circumnavigating the riverways that was going to place us in the Gulf of Mexico and back to South Florida. This journey began in May and pretty much had us back in Florida by late October, early November. So yeah, pretty substantial. And you weren't going to be home for a while. So you had to prepare for that as well, knowing that you were going to need seasonal clothing and that you were going to be in a couple different environments. Although I will say the nice thing about being on the water is you do travel to where it's nice. This was during the summer, and as winter approached, we certainly made our way back to South Florida. You know, we left Fort Lauderdale at sunup. We were getting ready to embark on this tour, and this was probably one of the biggest legs of the tour, where we pretty much went offshore into the Atlantic Ocean and would sail for 3 days. Continuous running, 8 hour shifts, 8 hours on, 8 hours off, 8 hours on, 8 hours off. The boat kept running. The boat did not stop. We merely continued and kept our course. Our course, and like I said, was the planning aspect is knowing where you were. So starting out in roughly the Miami area of South Florida, specifically Fort Lauderdale, and as you can see, the East Coast is quite substantial. There's quite a lot of territory between where we were and, of course, where we were going, which was up in Maine on this particular leg of the trip. You know, a lot of things have to be considered in this trip. Is the amount of fuel that you have, is it going to get you to where you need to be? Of course, the food on board, did that sustain us for a period of time? And when would be the next time we would need to stop for both fuel and food, as well as being out on the water? You know, if something were to break, you didn't just stop and call for someone to bring you something. You pretty much had to be self-sufficient. And so I guess, you know, learning that at a young age was pretty important, that I learned a great deal of independence in my life. And I think that might be a lot of my forward thinking as well. You know, you could just take that straight shot. It's usually a 5 to 7 day trip. And as you can see, you don't really, you come close around North Carolina to the land. However, you're predominantly out at sea most of the time. And like I said, it's about a 5 to 7 day journey if you were to do that. We did have the capacity, but also taking consideration for the crew and that we weren't in that much of a hurry. Certainly, our other option was to start in Fort Lauderdale and make it as far as Hilton Head, North Carolina. That was going to be our first leg, and like I said, that was going to put us out at sea for about 3 days. 8 hours on, 8 hours off. You would operate the helm and basically navigate, staying along this course, this straight line that we had put before us. Now, as you can see, we started out quite close, heading out from Fort Lauderdale, Port Everglades Inlet, and we were right there. We were right on the coast, but it wasn't but maybe about 8 to 12 hours of sailing that pretty soon we were working our way away from the coast. And as you can see, the East Coast curves in, and that's not very effective to maintain the distance and travel time if you were to follow the curve and maintain the security and the closeness of the coast. We were steaming forward. We were trying to make quick time. Again, about 3 days at sea. You know, out at sea, it's quite beautiful. The sky is blue, the clouds, and you don't see anything out there. You might see the birds and the dolphins. They'll come visit you. They jump from freighter to freighter, following along the shipping lanes. But you're pretty much out there by yourself and you're dependent on the horizon. However, one of the things that you also maintain, and it helps with electronics now, sailors early on would look at the stars as well as follow a compass heading. But having the electronic benefit, we were able to see via the satellites our location. And once an hour, it was routine to mark on that chart each location that we were each hour at the top of the hour. This allowed us to not only confirm on the paper chart and verify that we were going in the direction that we needed to go, that straight line that you had seen earlier. So when you're out here looking at this vast amount of water, which way is straight? The clouds are constantly changing, the weather is changing, and many times you may find yourself in a storm where you've got lots of cloud cover and, quite frankly, the gray sky matching with the gray surface color of the water. Yeah, it made it a little difficult sometimes to see where you were going. But again, relying on your electronics and the satellites, which you can't see, to give us that guidance and allow us to see digitally where we were and then match that with the numbers on the map. We would mark with an erasable marker on that plastic that was over the chart, and it would allow us to keep track of where we were going. You know, I think a lot of this has to do with life, that you want to always have those measuring tools, those satellites, if you will, that are reminding us where we are and where we need to go, and that we're right on course and that we're doing that which we need to stay on course. You know, it wasn't until you got closer to shore that you could start to see buildings and the shoreline, and that allowed you to get a better reference of where you were and where you were heading. You know, always having that shoreline to the right reminded you that you were along the coast, that you were heading in the right direction, which was north. Many times you need navigational markers such as lighthouses, tall structures that are along the shoreline. They emit that light and let you know that there's land, that there could be a peninsula, that there could even be a shoal, you know, that under the water surface, under the surface of the water sandbar that's not going to give you the depth that you can travel in. So understanding these markers and recognizing and seeing these markers at all times of the day is certainly important as well. You know, as we approach North Carolina in this particular return to port, there's channel markers in these charts that show us a direction, basically like a shipping lane or a highway. And as you can see in the dotted lines here, this is the shipping channel of coming into port and going out of port. And there's markers such as floating buoys that are affixed to the bottom, if you will, of the ocean at those given depths. But you need to follow those markers that are in place. People that have gone before you have left those clues that this is the safer location of the water to be in, and the hazards are free, at least known hazards. That being said, you know, we need to find those mentors and find those people in our life that have taken that path before us and utilize the direction that they've given us, that the charts they're providing to us that allow us to see the pathway that's safe and that's going to get us back into shore. You know, there's a little known secret that you didn't necessarily have to go the route we did, although that was our particular route. In my growing up, I have taken other routes up the East Coast as well. You know, before this endeavor of being a full-time first mate engineer, I had helped my father, who was a yacht captain, to basically ferry boats for those individuals who owned boats. They just didn't have the time to sail the boat themselves, or the boat was too big to be placed on a mobile device and being transported from point A to point B. In which case, my father, during the slow part of his season, certain times in his career, that he would ferry these boats from New York, Boston, down to South Florida, where the owners would come down and enjoy the winters in South Florida and then request the boat be transported back to its port in the north, whether Boston or New York, Connecticut. I share this with you because, there's alternatives in life. We took the more risky, being out offshore. It's around Savannah, Georgia. You're roughly about 150 miles offshore. And that certainly is a decent trek of time to even get back to shore, almost to the point where you're better off continuing to sail north rather than make the hard turn and travel west, going directly to the shore that you're perpendicular to. In this image, I've highlighted in yellow the what's known as the intercoastal waterway, and this travels up the east coast of the U.S. And I share this with you because it's protected waters. It's protected by the various islands, marshes, and shores that separate this canal, if you will, from the open ocean. So you do have the protection of not being out in the open waters. And many times this is a choice, if it's too rough, but you still need to travel. You still need to make time and you still need to get through life. And the various inlets that run along this particular route do allow you to get out and to enjoy the open water as well as the safety to get back into that protected area. However, there's not all that protection in place. And I think much like life, you have to kind of get out and be exposed to those elements. And that's what's been highlighted here in blue, is the intercoastal just doesn't run completely through. So there is a part from the Delaware River that you do need to go offshore. You do need to brave the open Atlantic Ocean, and the same thing with Boston. You do need to brave the open ocean to get up to the coast of Maine. That being said, we have to decide, do we want the protective course of being in the inland waterway, and are we prepared to take some of those challenges that have us outside of that protection? Are we ready to embrace that part of life? And, some of us, maybe not. Maybe we need to travel a little bit more inland water to get more comfortable with our vessel, our ship, meaning ourselves, our life. Maybe we need to find someone that we can sail with. Many times there's sailing groups or caravans, and there's safety in numbers. If you're able to have the luxury of following another vessel in the open water or sailing as a group, that if something were to occur, you at least have the protection of someone around you that may have tools or the expertise to fix something, or may be able to, dare I say, even tow you back to shore, back to safety, should something mechanically happen. So you're not going at it alone. And many times this could be a coach, or a mentor as well, that is there to help guide, to be that vessel in front of you that maybe knows the way, or at least allows you to not feel like you're out there by yourself. Many times we just like the peripheral of someone being next to us. In fact, many times I think that's why so many of us are in relationships, is that we like this partner next to us, this person we can count on, this person we can confide in, or just that person that can reassure us that, hey, we're on the right course, we're going in the right direction. Even though all the signs are there for us to visualize it, I think as human beings, we do appreciate that, yeah, there's somebody there that can sort of validate that what where we're going and what we're doing is the correct thing to do. So the waves of change are always going to happen in our life, and we just need to learn to embrace it. We need to see that life is always changing, and although the course may be the same, there's different routes and directions that we can take to get to the same destination. You know, we can brave it offshore and tackle the open waters of that large ocean called life, or we can travel in the protected waters known as the intercoastal waterway and allow us that sense of protection that everything will be okay and that we'll still be able to get to our destination just having that protection. But I have to share with you is, you know, that protection with taking that specific route, with this inland route of the yellow path, is it has its limitations. If your vessel is of a certain height, you have to wait for a bridge to open. If your vessel is of a certain depth, there are certain channels that you might not be able to access because they can only keep it dredged or cleared as far as the depth of the channel, if you will, is only a certain depth. So if your vessel is bigger vessel, you might not be able to travel that inland protected area. Again, being relegated by bridges, that's going to slow your pace down. Many bridges are on a time sequence so that they only open at every hour or every half hour. And if you get to such an obstacle kind of at the wrong time, you can be spending a lot of time just sitting there waiting. And I think that, again, that's metaphor for life, is that many times we find ourselves hustling and bustling to get to that next bridge, that crossroads in our life, only to find that we have to wait until it finally opens. And what is it that magically allows it to open and allow us to pass through? Those are some of the obstacles that we're going to find in life. And when you're out in the open ocean, you don't have those obstacles. You don't have bridges. You don't have depth restrictions, and you're out able to cruise. But again, being out in the ocean does have its risks. It does have its concerns. And again, if you're taking this trip solo, you can suffer some of those waves of change in a much more profound way, for sure. You know, the water's constantly moving, and once we learn how to embrace that it's moving for us and not to us, I think that's where we begin to live our best life. I think that is where we begin to ride the tidal wave, if you will, of life moving us around on purpose and in the direction that we want to go. So, how can we do this? How can we embrace life a little differently? Well, I think one of the big things is, first of all, how do we perceive ourselves and how do we think? And it's that thinking that I think can be very disruptive many times, that keeps us in that inland waterway, that keeps us afraid of even going out and seeing what the open ocean looks like. You know, some days it's calm like this, and other days it's or some raging seas where you can't see the horizon when you're in the trough of a wave until you get up top of the wave and you can see the horizon again, only to be brought back down into that trough of the wave. You know, much like life, we can't always see. Maybe it's overcast skies and we can't see the future, but we can see the horizon. And you have to have that measurable amount of faith, knowing that you're headed for a destination. And what is that destination in your life? Well, I think that's part of this Ask Adam concept, is understanding what your destination is and how to get you there, how to help you understand this mindset of sometimes it's nice to be on the inland canal, and other times we really need to embrace the outside and take some of those risks, knowing that it's going to help us get where we want to be further and faster. You know, one of the foundations I always lean on is the concept of neuroencoding, and that's basically rewiring our brain, how we think about things, and understanding that maybe it's not a risk but it's an adventure that we're taking in this new endeavor. And I think once you start to change the mindset of how you see something, I think it changes the concept. So if you're looking at your life and saying, I want to get somewhere further faster, I want to reach my goals at a much quicker pace, I want to outpace those around me, or I have such a new idea that really needs to get put in place, that you're willing to take that risk or oversee the risk because you see the advantage of, as we did, sail up the coast in that 3 days time and get from point A to point B without restrictions. So I hope that you have found this episode to be educational and that you enjoyed a little bit of the metaphoric stories that I've shared. If you found this helpful, certainly comment, like, or share. I certainly would appreciate that. And if you do have some questions about life and how to look at things, I certainly would love to answer those and help. This is only one of the perspectives that I've had in growing up in my life. One of them was the water. Another one was my father was also a pilot. He was quite the Renaissance man, I guess, that he exposed me to so much, so often, that my perspective on life is quite interesting. So, let's go out and embrace this thing called change, and let's learn to ride these waves that are out there that are for us, and that they're not crashing over on us, but that they're going to allow us to move in that forward direction, that they're going to be the undercurrents that are going to help guide us to where we need to be in our lives, and to help us reach those points of success that we all seek. So until the next episode, ask Adam.